Kibo and the golden bananas, the heartbeat of the jungle, deep in the lush, emerald embrace of the Tambuzi jungle, where the air hummed with the chatter of a million insects, and the canopy formed a cathedral of green. There lived a rhythm. It wasn't the rhythm of the rain on broad leaves, nor the beat of the tribal drums from the distant human village. This rhythm was the steady, joyful thump-thump-thump of the gorilla grove. Here the silverback gorillas, the wise and mighty guardians of the jungle, communicated through chest beats. A quick light beat was a greeting. A slow deep one was a warning. A complex rollicking rhythm was a story being told. And the most magnificent beat of all belonged to the great silverback, Majuto, whose chest thrummed with the very pulse of the earth itself. But the grove had another, more chaotic rhythm. It was the pitter-patter of tiny, frantic feet, accompanied by the swish of a long, prehensile tail and a constant, chattering monologue. This was Kibo. Kibo was a vervet monkey, small and sleek with a black face fringed by white fur, and eyes the color of melted chocolate that sparkled with irrepressible curiosity. He was an orphan, found as a shivering infant by Majuto after a terrible storm. Defying all jungle tradition, the great silverback had taken the tiny monkey in. The gorillas of the grove, after initial grumbles, had become his large, grumpy, but deeply devoted family. Kibo, however, did not fit in. He couldn't produce a chest beat that was anything more than a faint piff-paff. He was too small to wrestle, too light to make the vine swings creak with his weight, and his idea of a good time was not meditating on a mossy rock, but seeing how many mangoes he could stack before they toppled over. Kibo. Majuto's voice would rumble, not with anger, but with weary affection. Stillness, little one. A gorilla finds strength in calm, but there's so much to see. Kibo would chatter, already swinging from a low-hanging branch. Biko the hornbill says the passion flower vines are blooming near the great river, and the glimmerwing butterflies are migrating through the sunspot valley. If I'm still, I'll miss it all. His best friend, a wisecracking, mango-obsessed fruit bat named Zuban, would hang upside down from a nearby branch, wrapping his leathery wings around himself like a cloak. "He's got a point, your bigness," Zuban would say, his voice a dry squeak. Stillness is terribly overrated. You never find a perfectly ripe papaya by being still. Kibo's heart belonged to the grove, but his spirit belonged to the entire jungle. He was its unofficial, and often disastrous explorer. He had once tried to help a family of squirrels store nuts and had accidentally buried their entire winter supply in a deep, muddy puddle. He had attempted to groom Biko's magnificent yellow beak and gotten his head stuck inside it for an hour. The other young gorillas, especially a burly, serious one named Jabari, would snort. "He is not one of us, Majuto. He is a mess of noise and nonsense." But Majuto would simply watch Kibo with his deep, knowing eyes. "Every creature has its own beat, Jabari. We must simply learn to listen for it." Kibo tried to listen. He would sit with the gorillas, puffing out his little chest and thumping it with all his might. Piff-paff, piff-paff, it was a pathetic, tiny sound, lost in the grand symphony of the grove. A wave of sadness would wash over him. He loved his family with every fiber of his being, but he felt like a single, wrong note in their perfect, powerful song. The fading heart. The trouble began subtly. The great Tambuzi tree, the ancient, colossal tree at the center of the gorilla grove, began to look tired. Its leaves, usually a vibrant, waxy green, were turning pale and brittle. The golden, luminous bananas. It bore the legendary golden bananas that were said to hold the jungle's vitality, were shriveling on the branch, their light growing dim. Then the rhythm of the grove began to falter. It started with the elders. Their deep, resonant chest beats became shallow and weak. Then the younger gorillas, like Jabari, found their beats losing power. The very air in the grove grew heavy and silent. The playful wrestling stopped. The stories were no longer told. The gorillas moved slowly. Their shoulders slumped, as if a great weight was pressing down on them. Majuto called a gathering at the foot of the Tambuzi tree. He looked older than Kibo had ever seen him. "My family." Majuto's voice was a strained rumble, his chest barely moving. "The heart of the jungle is sick. The golden bananas are failing. Our strength, our rhythm, comes from this tree. If it dies, our spirit dies with it." A murmur of fear ran through the gorillas. "What can we do?" Jabari asked, his own beat a faint echo. "There is an old legend," Majuto said. his gaze drifting upwards to the dying tree, a story from the time of my grandfather's grandfather. It is said that the Tambuzi tree is connected to the crystal caves at the edge of the world, where the first sunbeam touched the earth. The water that drips from the crystals there, the sun-drop dew, can heal any living thing. It is the only thing that can restore the golden bananas. Hope flickered in the grove, but it was quickly dampened. The crystal caves? An elder gorilla gasped. But they are guarded by the squeaker screechers. A collective shiver ran through the gorillas. The squeaker screechers were a mythical terror of the jungle, a vast colony of bats that were not friendly, fruit eaters like Zuban, but fierce insectivores, with sonic screeches that could disorient and terrify any creature. And the path is unknown, Jabari added grimly. No gorilla has ever journeyed that far. We are too big, too slow. We would never make it. Despair settled over the grove like a thick fog. They were guardians, not explorers. Their strength was in their home, and their home was dying. Kibo, listening from his perch on a low branch, felt his little heart hammering against his ribs. Piff-paff, piff-paff, piff-paff. It wasn't a gorilla's beat, but it was fast, and it was full of a desperate, determined energy. He looked at his family, his large, powerful family, rendered helpless. He looked at Majuto, who had given him everything, now looking so defeated, and he looked at the vast, terrifying, and wonderfully exciting jungle beyond the grove. His beat was not powerful. It was not grand, but it was his, and it was telling him to go. He took a deep breath, puffed out his chest as far as it would go, and gave the loudest, most courageous piff-paff he could muster. Every gorilla turned to look at him. "I'll go," Kibo said, his voice squeaking only a little. The silence was broken by Jabari's derisive snort. "You, a little monkey? You would be lost before you reached the whispering reeds." "Jabari is right, little one," Majuto said, his voice heavy with concern. "The jungle beyond the grove is dangerous. There are thorny thickets that could trap you, rivers with quick currents, and predators. But that's just it," Kibo insisted, swinging down to stand before Majuto. "I'm small. I can slip through thorns you can't. I'm light. I can cross vines that wouldn't hold your weight. I'm noise and nonsense, and maybe that's what we need right now." He looked up at the great silverback, his chocolate brown eyes pleading. "You gave me a home, Majuto. You gave me a family. Let me do this. Let me find the beat for our home." Majuto stared at the small monkey, seeing not the chaos and the mishaps, but the brave, loyal heart that had always been there. He saw the one creature in the grove whose rhythm was not fading, because it came from a different source entirely. After a long, heavy silence, Majuto gave a slow, deliberate nod. The jungle's greatest strength has always been its diversity. Every creature has a part to play. Go. Kibo, find the sun-drop dew. The journey begins, and so, with a small leaf pack of berries and a water skin made from a hollowed-out gourd, Kibo set out, Zuben, after a dramatic sigh about the lack of decent mangoes on perilous quests, fluttered down to land on his shoulder. "You're going to get us both eaten." "You know," Zuban said cheerfully, "but it'll be a fascinating story to tell, if we survive." Their first challenge was the Canyon of Echoes, a deep, rocky split in the earth where the only way across was a series of ancient, fraying vine bridges. For a gorilla, it would have been impassable. For Kibo, it was a playground. He scrambled across with ease, his tail providing perfect balance, while Zuban fluttered overhead. "See?" Kibo chattered, his confidence growing. "This is easy." His triumph was short-lived. In the middle of the last bridge, a rotten vine snapped. Kibo let out a shriek as he fell, his tiny hands grabbing onto another vine just in time. He dangled precariously over the dizzying drop, the river below a silver thread. "A little help, Zuban," he cried. Zuban swooped down, but he was too small to lift Kibo. "I'm a fruit bat, not a cargo bat." "Think, Kibo. Use that monkey nonsense Majuto is always talking about." Kibo's mind raced. He looked at the swinging vines around him. He wasn't strong, but he was agile. He began to swing, building momentum. Back and forth, until he could let go and launch himself through the air, grabbing a thick, sturdy vine on the other side. He scrambled up to safety, his heart pounding. "Okay," he panted, lying on the solid ground. Maybe not easy, but doable. They journeyed on, into the whispering reeds, a vast marshland where tall, Slender reeds seemed to murmur secrets to one another in the wind. The ground was soft and treacherous, and the path was a maze. Kibo's small size was a disadvantage here. He couldn't see over the reeds. "We're lost," Zuban moaned, after what felt like hours of wandering in circles. "We're going to be reed murmurs forever." "No, we're not," Kibo said, though he felt just as lost. Then he had an idea. "Zuban, fly up, be my eyes." Zuban flapped up above the reeds. "I see the twisted termite mound to the left. Head that way." With Zuban as his scout, Kibo navigated the maze. He learned that his strength wasn't just in his own abilities, but in his friendship. They were a team. As night fell, they found shelter in a hollow log. The jungle was loud and scary in the dark, full of unfamiliar hoots and rustles. Kibo missed the deep, reassuring chest beats of the grove. He felt very small and very alone. "Do you think we can really do this, Zuban?" he whispered. Zuban, huddled beside him, was uncharacteristically quiet. "I don't know, Kibo, but I know that Piff-Paff back in the grove was the bravest sound I've ever heard, braver than any gorilla's thump. So we'll keep going." The song of the squeaker screechers. After days of travel, navigating by the position of the sunflowers that always turned their faces towards the light, they reached the foothills of the Crystal Mountains. The air grew cool and thin, and then they heard it, a faint, high-pitched chirping that grew into a chaotic, ear-splitting symphony of squeaks and screeches. It was the sound of thousands upon thousands of bats. The squeaker screechers. The entrance to the crystal caves was a dark, gaping maw in the mountainside, shimmering with a faint internal light, but swirling around it was a living cloud of bats, their bodies a blur of motion, their voices a wall of sound. "Well," Zuban said, his voice trembling, "there they are. The legends are true, and they are very loud." They watched from behind a rock. Any time a large moth or a curious lizard ventured near the cave, the bats would descend in a shrieking, disorienting swarm, driving the intruder away. "We'll never get past them," Kibo said, his hope crumbling. "Their screeches are too confusing. I can't even think straight." He slumped against the rock, defeated. They had come so far, only to fail at the final hurdle. He thought of Majuto's weary face, of Jabari's fading beat, of the silent grove. A tear rolled down his cheek. Zuban watched his friend, his own fear replaced by a fierce loyalty. "Kibo," he said softly, "you spent your whole life trying to make a beat you weren't built for. But what's the one thing you can do that no gorilla can?" Kibo looked up, confused. "Make a mess?" "No," Zuban squeaked in exasperation. "You can chatter. You can make 100 different sounds a minute. The gorillas have one rhythm. You have a whole cacophony." Kibo's eyes widened. The screeches of the bats weren't a melody. They were a chaotic noise, a mess of sound. It was the one language he was fluent in. He stood up, a new plan forming in his mind. It was the most nonsense, monkey-brained plan of all time. It was perfect. "Zuban," he said, a familiar, mischievous sparkle returning to his eyes. "I need you to create a diversion. A big, juicy, fruit bat-shaped diversion." Zuban gulped. "I was afraid you were going to say that." With a deep breath, Zuban flew out into the open, flapping wildly and squeaking at the top of his lungs. "Hey, ugly mugs. Over here! I've got the juiciest wings in the jungle!" The cloud of squeaker screechers immediately turned their attention to this noisy intruder. With a collective shriek, a large part of the swarm dove towards Zuban, who zipped and zagged, leading them on a wild chase away from the cave entrance. This was Kibo's chance. He took a deep breath and ran towards the cave. The remaining bats noticed him and swooped down, their screeches hitting him like a physical force. It was disorienting and terrifying, but instead of trying to block it out, Kibo did something extraordinary. He opened his mouth and gave it right back to them. He didn't screech. He chattered. He mimicked their sounds, mixed them with the hoot of an owl, the chirp of a cricket, the gossipy whisper of the reeds, and his own frantic monkey talk. It was a wall of pure, undiluted nonsense. The bats, who were used to terrifying creatures into silence, were completely thrown. They faltered in mid-air, their own screeches faltering in confusion. This tiny, noisy creature wasn't acting scared. He was conversing? In that moment of stunned hesitation, Kibo dove through the entrance and into the crystal caves, the heart of light. Inside, Kibo forgot all about the bats. The cave was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. It was a giant geode with walls, floor, and ceiling made entirely of massive, pale blue crystals that glowed with a soft internal light. In the center of the cavern was a small, still pool, and from the tip of the largest, central crystal, a single, perfect drop of water formed and fell with a soft plink into the pool. Sundrop dew. Kibo carefully approached the pool. He could feel the vitality radiating from it. The air itself tasted clean and electric. He took out his empty gourd and dipped it into the pool, filling it with the magical glowing water. As he turned to leave, he saw carvings on the cave walls, ancient, faded images. They showed the jungle, the tambuzi tree, and a small, monkey-like creature handing a glowing gourd to a great silverback. Kibo's breath caught. The legend was older than anyone knew, and it had always involved a monkey. His own beat, his own path, had been written in the stars long before he was born. He wasn't the wrong note. He was the missing one. With the gourd of Sundrop dew safely secured, he ran back to the entrance. Zuban was waiting, looking ruffled but triumphant. "Don't ever ask me to do that again," Zuban panted. "But it worked." "You did it." The journey home felt faster, lighter. Kibo's heart was no longer a nervous piff-paff, but a steady, confident drum of purpose. When they finally burst through the foliage and into the gorilla grove, the scene was heartbreaking. The tambuzi tree was almost gray. The golden bananas were dark and shriveled, and the gorillas were lying listlessly around the clearing, their chests still. "Majuto," Kibo cried, running to the great silverback's side. Majuto's eyes fluttered open. He saw Kibo, and then he saw the glowing gourd in his hands. A spark of life returned to his gaze. With the whole grove watching, their breaths held, Kibo climbed the tambuzi tree. He carefully poured the sundrop dew onto the roots of the great tree. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a soft, golden light began to pulse from the roots, traveling up the trunk, flowing out along the branches. The gray bark darkened to rich brown. The pale leaves flushed with vibrant green, and one by one the golden bananas plumped up, their skins shining with a brilliant, warm, life-giving light. The effect on the gorillas was instantaneous. Color returned to their faces. They slowly rose to their feet, and then Jabari, taking a deep, full breath, thumped his chest. Boom! It was strong. It was clear. Another gorilla joined in. Boom, boom, L. Then another, and another, until the whole grove was filled with the powerful, joyful, thunderous rhythm of life restored. It was the most beautiful sound Kibo had ever heard. Majuto stood, his full height and power returned. He looked at Kibo, who was watching from the tree, his little chest quiet. The great silverback walked over and gently lifted Kibo onto his broad shoulder. Then Majuto turned to face the entire grove. He raised a massive hand, and the beating stopped. "Today," Majuto's voice boomed, strong and clear once more. "A small monkey with a small beat saved our great home. He did not do it with strength, but with courage. He did not do it by being like us, but by being exactly who he is." Majuto then did something he had never done before. He reached up and, with infinite gentleness, he thumped his chest right next to Kibo. Boom! It was an invitation. Tentatively, Kibo raised his small fist. He looked at Jabari, who gave him a slow, respectful nod. He looked at Zuban, who winked from his perch. He took a deep breath, and he thumped his own tiny chest against the great silverback's side. Piff-paff. It was still a small sound, but in the respectful silence of the grove, it echoed with a power all its own. It was the beat of courage, of friendship, of a different kind of strength. And as the gorillas joined in, their mighty booms harmonizing with Kibo's brave little piff-paff, the rhythm of the grove was born anew, richer, more diverse, and more beautiful than it had ever been before. Kibo, the little monkey, had finally found his place in the song, and from that day on, the most cherished rhythm in the grove was the powerful, joyful, thunderous symphony that always had a little piff-paff right at its heart.